right, we'll go ahead and get started. You can certainly see that I'm not Kristen Bernard. I think she's number one in your programs, number one in your hearts. Kristen was really sorry that she could not be with us. Governor Deal's schedule changed this week to where she could not be away from Atlanta. And I certainly know how that works with the chancellor and our board members. My calendar even is just in pencil, I think in theory most times, so I know that things are subject to change. But you know this, Kristen is a huge supporter of the work that's going on here and the conversation that's going on here. If I recall correctly, she was here last year, and I think spoke at the luncheon, if I recall, of this group, and you know that she's a tireless supporter of what we're trying to do as far as Complete College Georgia. She sends her regards and wants to thank you for all that you do on a daily basis in support of transforming lives here in Georgia. I'm Houston Davis. I've been able to meet most of you throughout the year. I made it to the year point. May 1st, I think, was day one in 2012, and the chancellor did not put a pink slip on my desk. So I was relieved of that. I have thoroughly enjoyed my first year with you, and I continue to be so excited by the great work that's going on in the system. And there were those things that I thought I knew about USG that attracted me to be able to come here and play whatever role I could to advance that. But I've found more and more as I've learned. So not Kristen, but you're stuck with me. And considering my time slot, right here before lunch, I'm going to do my best to stay focused and on point with my comments here today. I know that my audience has wants and needs that don't involve hearing from me. They involve getting to lunch here in a little while, so we'll pay attention to the clock. I had a recent opportunity to speak at Georgia Highlands commencement, and I made notes there that I knew everyone wanted to get beyond my speech and get to the business at hand, and I knew that I didn't want to be like this guy. There was a couple that was going on vacation. But the fellow's wife was on a business trip, and he decided he could go on the day before and at least make preparations. So he went to the destination, knowing that only a day separated them from their romantic getaway and being able to be back together. When he reached the hotel, he decided to send his wife a quick email so she'd know that he was anxiously awaiting her arrival. Unfortunately, though, and this mistake can occur, when typing her email address, he left a number off the end of her username, and his note was directed instead to an elderly preacher's wife whose husband had passed away only the day before. When the grieving widow checked her email, she took one look at the monitor, let out a piercing scream, and fell to the floor in a dead faint. At the sound, her family rushed in the room and saw this note on the screen. "Dearest wife, just got checked in. Everything prepared for your arrival tomorrow. P.S. Sure is hot down here." Going to try and stay on point as best I can. Two things today that I do want to do. First is talk a little big picture about the completion agenda. And then second of all, spend the balance of my time talking about the elephant in the room, and that is MOOCs and new models and alternative models. I thought that'd be a really good way, and I had a great visit with a subset of this audience just a little while ago, and we started that conversation. But hopefully I'll put a little more details to that, and they won't be bored to tears by hearing the same thing. But let's go big picture first of all. We pause quite frequently when we call the system together for various purposes to give status reports on Complete College Georgia, talk about where we are in the cycle of work, probably even celebrate some of the good things that are occurring on the campus. But I don't think that we pause often enough to have a conversation about or reflect on what are we really trying to accomplish. What's the intended message versus the message that's being received? I think that it's probably important for everyone to understand that is a part of a concerted effort to lift up higher education and its importance to the future of Georgia. Much of what we're doing in the completion agenda is very familiar to those of you that have been grounded in and involved in the retention, progression, and graduation initiatives. The RPG work that's gone on here in Georgia in prior years really is what have allowed us to get a jump start on a lot of the other states that are, again, starting their work on a completion agenda. The Complete College America states in some ways look with awe on what we've been able to do in a short period of time underneath that banner, but a lot of it is because we found some way to accelerate and continue and lift up the work that you were doing already under RPG. So you had a bit of a jump start, and that's a great thing. It also has heavy roots in the governor's strategic plan. This would be real inside baseball. You'd be policy wonkish if you knew these things by heart. But there are 6 major categories of Governor Deal's strategic plan. 3 of them really hit at the heart of what we are as an enterprise, and they speak to how important the university system of Georgia is to the next 50 or so years of Georgia's future. The first is the category of educated. There are the goals inside of that to think about how well are we positioning our education and training opportunities to make certain that whether it's individuals emerging through the educational pipeline coming out of K-12, or it be our existing workforce, or retooling and retraining in the workforce, that our education and training assets are at world-class levels. Growing is a second category, and that's really code for economic development. And if you'll read into that governor's plan, the topics of growing, there's a lot in there about human capital development, and certainly I think we would raise our hands and make the argument that we are central to that. We're matter of fact, I don't think you could say that there's a more important ingredient to that in terms of knowledge transfer, the cultivation of knowledge. And then the last category of efficiency. And certainly higher education, we're always very proud when those topics come up when we get compared to our sister areas of state government. We can have a proud story to tell in terms of the work that we're already doing. I mean, we certainly are an enterprise that is constantly involved in opportunities to think about how we're renewing, refreshing, using scarce resources. So it's a natural fit for us to continue in that conversation. The completion agenda is rooted in Chancellor Huckabee's sort of core agenda. Some of you may recall in his when he first started, I think he had a barnstorming trip around the state, and his message centered around 4 big goals that he had as chancellor and that the board had as we were thinking about the future for the system: accountability, partnerships, performance, and affordability. Especially that last one, the great concern that he has about the fact that we cannot price Georgians out of opportunities and seeing that they can have a relationship with the university system of Georgia. We have to be attentive, and we certainly need to be thinking creatively about meeting need-based aid gaps that exist. And then it's also rooted just in our board as they're getting together and having conversations about the completion agenda and their overall agenda. Chairman Dink Neesmith is the chair of the board this year, and he talks about his 3 big goals. One is how the board and how the chancellor are supporting what we're trying to do as far as degree completion. What are we doing in terms of spurring and thinking creatively and innovatively about economic development opportunities and thinking broadly about the role of research in that. And then the last category, and it lines up very nicely with Governor Deal's category of efficiencies. Are we really thinking about positioning our scarce resources, and it is a scarce dollar? Are we making certain that we can maximize that, make certain that that scarce dollar finds its way into the classroom and that scarce dollar finds its way into transforming students' lives? So it's not as if Complete College Georgia is something that just exists on its own. It really permeates everything, all the conversations, and it's almost impossible as we begin talking about things like strategic plans of the system. The completion agenda is at the heart of that. It is the foundation upon which that's being built. And guys, this is my bias, that's not a bad thing. Because in the end, if we're setting at the heart of who we are as an enterprise, the opportunity to transform students' lives and get to them those life-changing opportunities that a degree and that setting you up for lifelong learning provides, that's probably a good place to start the conversation. It really is our messaging and it's our functional platform for a lot of what we do. Those of you that have heard me talk, you know about how critical this is. You know that the completion agenda really has been growing in the last couple of decades, but I think it became crystal clear when we have statistics out there that look at the mix of opportunities that now require some post-secondary degree. And mind you, I'm not talking about just bachelor's degrees or master's degrees. It might be a one-year certificate, but something beyond a high school diploma. Those of you, you're probably sick of hearing me talk about in 1973, 72% of opportunities required just a high school diploma or less. But as we look forward to the future, that's only 38% of opportunities. That's a sea change in a very, very short period of time. 1973 was not that long ago. I can probably get an amen from the congregation on that. It's critical because we've got 1.1, actually pushing 1.2 million Georgians with some college, no degree. A huge population out there, that many of which are our former students. We have got big problems in that we know that we're contributing to the some college, no degree, because there are students sitting in our classrooms right now, many of whom are in academic good standing, that are a life experience away from having to stop out, and we know once they stop out, they don't return. So we've got a spiraling problem with the some college, no degree. It's critical because we've got probably another million Georgians that have a high school degree that have never, and again, this is between 25 and 64 years of age, that have never taken advantage of any post-secondary opportunity. That means never even darkened the doors. Our assets, technical college, private, proprietary. So a tremendous amount of, especially in a down economy where folks are really thinking about how can I retool, how can I reset my assets. Maybe college didn't seem that important to me 25 years ago, but now I've got to do something because guess what? I've got 24 or 25 more years to go in terms of my career. So the message of the completion agenda certainly is that of it's critical to us thinking about how we position opportunities, but it can be clouded by what we hear from other states. I call this some of the CCA myths versus realities that I think all of the Complete College America states are having to deal with. And mind you, some states, it absolutely has been a top-down conversation, and that's borne out by Lynn Weisenbach is here. She and I've had opportunity, as well as a couple of folks in this room, to see some of the other leadership teams. Some of the other states come to Complete College America meetings, and it's, no offense, they're elected officials. It'll be 2 or 3 House members, 2 or 3 Senate members, and the governor's staff. And you'll look and you'll say, well, there's nobody from higher ed at this table. Well, the reality is many states, if you want to sneeze in higher education, it has to be done in statute. That has to be aligned within somebody's bill to okay you to do that. We are very, very fortunate. My former state of Oklahoma is very fortunate to be in this category too. We enjoy a tremendous amount of autonomy in what goes on as far as admissions, teaching, learning, accountability, quality. Those things, because of our autonomous government structure and that higher education controls most of that, it manifests itself in the Complete College America conversation in that ours is dominated by higher education. And what are the research and analyses of what we need to do telling us about what complete college should be about in our state. I'll tell you that just like every other state, though, we're really concerned that higher ed works for about 5 out of 10 students that come to us, generally. When I say us, that's your institutions, private institutions that are in our state. That's pretty well in line with national norms. One thing that this can't be about, and I worry every single time that I can get in front of the Faculty Advisory Council or another groups like that, I have to make sure to let them know this is not about just giving degrees to those other 5 out of 10 students. That's not what this conversation is about. It's about identifying those individuals, and let's go to the 5 out of 10. And you guys have heard, some of you have heard me talk about this. It's identifying those 2 or 3 out of those remaining 5 that were in academic good standing when they departed. How can we get number 6, number 7, and maybe even number 8 to get re-engaged to finish what they started? If you want to have a face, if we wanted to have on a poster or on a milk carton what we're talking about with Complete College Georgia, that face should be, and every single person in this room has a student in mind as I describe this, the student that you have had in class or you've been providing support services for that you know they're a good student. You've had them maybe 2 or 3 times in your office, 2 or 3 times in your course. You know, maybe they're not brilliant, they're probably like me, they're just average, all right? But they can do, but you hear about them dropping out. And it breaks your heart, especially when you hear it didn't have anything to do with their commitment to school. It was life, okay? If people ask you what Complete College Georgia is about, that's what Complete College Georgia is about. I can't speak to what Complete College America is about. It's not my purview. I'm only worried about the borders of our state. I mean, that needs to be our message point. How can we find some way to re-engage those that our hearts just hurt when we hear about them stopping out? All that research and analysis that we've done and that you have done, one of the things I have to do is that very little of this really reflects what we've done at the state level. It's emerged, the priority areas that we would group. My staff gets tired of hearing about the buckets. The buckets that we would put a lot of the focal areas that you've identified in your Complete College Georgia plans, and as we've tried to organize ourselves from a policy standpoint. And it's not, I've been proud, and I don't think I would have come to Georgia if I saw an environment where we were just looking to replicate other states. I have a nice stubborn streak to me. I like to find my own way, a little self-determination. This is a state that's been willing to find its way in terms of what makes the biggest difference. We've identified major projects that you're involved with that are looking at what we would characterize as K-12 collegiate preparation sort of partnerships and initiatives, very intentional work with rethinking those relationships. And I got news for you. This is true in Oklahoma, it's true in Tennessee too. The best of that doesn't occur from the State Board of Regents and the State Department of Education getting together and coming up with a game plan. The best of that occurs from you with your regional partners in K-12, most of whom are in your Rotary clubs, or in your sons and daughters and grandsons and granddaughters ball teams, and the folks that you've got personal relationships, thinking about how can we develop more intentional and more forceful relationships to affect that. The second category being access, affordability, and value. All the good work that's going on. You're already knee and some of you neck deep in conversations about how you're positioned on those three topics of access, affordability, and value for the various publics that you serve. The third category, and we'll expand upon this here in a few minutes, some of the high-level thoughts, new and flexible credit and degree completion options, thinking about alternative delivery models, thinking about strategies to position what we do from a credit and a non-credit standpoint. The fourth category are supports for at-risk students, things that you've identified that you know can make the biggest difference. And then the fifth category that we have, or the fifth bucket, is all the work that's going on to not only maintain but improve the overall quality of teaching and learning on the campuses. And certainly applauding, and one of the things that we're looking forward to is we get your updates on the completion plans is beginning to lift up, because we'll be almost a year and a half into the work, and again, multiple years in support of your retention, progression, graduation type of items, being able to lift up some of those things that are showing the greatest improvements. But all of that contributes to an overall goal that it's not just on us, the USG, it's on our K-12 partners, it's on the technical colleges, it's on our private universities and colleges, it's on the proprietary sector. To think about how are we contributing toward that goal of moving from 42% of Georgians having at least a college degree or above, again, associate degree and up, to 60% by 2025. If I had a time machine, I would go back in time and try and mute anyone that talked about the overall 250,000 goal, 250,000 more graduates. That's just too big a number. It's too abstract, and it doesn't seem like it's anything that you could possibly begin pursuing. But the reality is, we produce right now 53,000 graduates a year, certificates up through doctoral programs. If you take that out by 3% increase a year out through 2025, we would be hitting a target of around 80,000. And we'd be well on our way. That would be the University System of Georgia over that time period producing approximately 160,000 more degrees than we would have otherwise if we just continued on our track. Now look, 3% increase annually, I know that's a stretch. I know that it is, but us thinking through, and many of you in thinking about stacking opportunities, looking at reverse transfer, looking again at that sixth student out of 10. How can you find those 3 or 4 students out of 100 that are right there on the cusp of being able to finish when they drop out? That's where some of that low-hanging opportunity is going to come from. But whatever the numbers, we know that all of this is going to require us to focus on meaningful degree opportunities. It doesn't do any good to print a bunch of degrees on McDonald's wrappers and just hand them out. I mean, in the end, somebody actually, you'd be pleased to know that from elected officials, I get more comments about what's the overall quality assurances that are undergirding this completion agenda. And my answer is always quite simple, our faculty. I don't know about you, but I'm pretty darn, I can bet with certainty that our faculty are going to stay on that hill of quality assurance. I mean, one of the things that we absolutely positively have to do is make certain that the courses, the course sequences, the programs are meaningful and they're bridging to opportunities into the future. I think that we have to focus on bridging gaps that exist for capable students. I mean, again, even the students that come and don't want to do, that's maybe an important conversation, maybe for another day. But if we can find some way to bridge those gaps for those students that are in academic good standing, that's a key. We absolutely know that we've got to be, and you're there already, trying to come up with ways to be more efficient with resources. And that's just not looking at the world through a budget lens. Okay? That's looking at it from a time and an effort as well. We are having to make tough choices about where we put our efforts, where we put our concerns, where we put our angst, where we put our opportunities that we're going to seize. Again, that's going to come from you as a campus community, and then us collectively as a system looking to see how we can do that. And then another area that we know that we're all having to focus on is that as we position all this for the future, how is it that we're driving that knowledge economy? And that's not just from a workforce lens. I think sometimes when we use the word economy in any relationship to education, people think we're just talking about workforce. You take it apart from an educational, from an economic, from a social, from a cultural, from a quality of life, from a health standpoint. There is no entity, no asset that the state of Georgia has that's more important than the University System of Georgia to setting the pace for what the next 75 to 100 years of the state are going to be. I got an excerpt from our strategic plan draft that kind of speaks to this, and it's going beyond that message of degree completion. We must maximize higher education's broader importance in driving business creation, transferring knowledge, fostering creativity and innovation, increasing global engagement, and committing to research, entrepreneurship, and community development. I mean, some of that is wrapped up in the concept of stewardship of place. I mean, it is us stepping back, and some of you have heard me talk about the fact that in the regions that we serve, that's defined in different ways by everybody, institution that's represented in this room, you are as big a fish as exists in that pond. All right? There are some other big fish, but you're as important as any other fish in the pond. We've got the power to convene, and we've got the power to be able to identify what are the most pressing challenges that our regions face. We may not have the assets that are going to solve it. We may not have a magic pill to be in play, but we can absolutely bring together our research, our teaching, our service assets against the other assets that are in that region and start saying, you know what, if it's water issues, if it's quality of life, if it's health, if it's some other category, maybe transportation infrastructure, there's no way that higher education is not going to be at the table and be a part of that conversation. We're an integral part of it, and I think we should seize that. Now, with the balance of my time, and I'm trying to stay on, and right now I'm doing pretty well. There's a good clock here that beeps just often enough to remind me it's there. The work that you're doing already on new models, I think is important, and it's forming the backdrop of any of our conversations as a system or as individual campuses or colleges or departments. But one focus that we're looking to lift up as we look at the next 12 to 24 months is looking at the exploration, the development, and the implementation of new and flexible models of course and degree completion. Again, how can we accelerate some of the things that you've already identified in your Complete College Georgia plans? How can we create an environment of innovation to surround those? And then how can we perhaps look to partner up with other resources that exist? When you hear new models, I mean, what's in the news? What's the term that comes to mind? MOOCs. For better or for worse, conversation seems to just go there whenever somebody talks about alternative models. I shared with the group prior to this, I've got a slide that I like to throw up that has massively open online courses, and then in red, orange, yellow, and green, each of those 4 words. And I think it's good because that's using the color scheme for the threat assessment for the feds. Courses doesn't bother us at all. It can stay green. Online bothers us less and less and less. People are even starting to talk about traditional online learning. How does that strike the ear? For those of you that are some of our pioneers over the last 10 to 15 years in that, congratulations. You're now in the norm. You're not the crazy folks out there pushing the envelope. All those nutty MOOC people are doing that for you. The open in orange, because that begins to scare folks. Open has connotations of free. Open has connotations of threatening core enterprise and threatening assumptions about that enterprise. Massively sets people off. Because massively sure does sound like, wow, single source provider. Where are we going with that? So as we begin taking apart this conversation, I think it's good for me, and although I was sad to hear that Kristen wasn't going to be able to be here, I thought it probably fair and appropriate, especially because you are a number of our innovators, but you're also some of our vanguards of quality, to give you a little bit of a look-see, to give you a heads up about some other announcements that are going to follow as we go forward. Our early conversations within the system about MOOCs, and then between our system and others around the country, really have kind of led to a wide variety of perspectives. On one end is that this is really moving toward, it's just another iteration of the open educational resources world. I mean, something that we've all been involved with passively or intentionally for our entire academic careers. But absolutely over the last few years, the idea of open learning objects, open courseware, I mean, MIT Open Course Project, I mean, it's been around for over a decade now. And the idea that learning objects, learning modules, open e-textbooks, those are things that you're already working with. You're already integrating into your courses. There's a perspective on MOOCs that this is just another version of that. It's another layer. It's obviously, it's OER on steroids, but it's there, and it's certainly important to think about it in terms of how it's stretching those boundaries. Another level, though, is to look at this as, hey, this is a significant challenge to core enterprise. And when we start thinking about our academic perspective, our financial perspective, and our facilities perspective, it challenges the assumptions that all three of those things are built upon when we start following the string out in our minds to where logical conclusions can go. I think that the MOOC conversation is kind of a mix of myths, realities, concerns, and opportunities. I thought it fair to maybe throw 4 key questions at us. First of all, what do we know, or what we think we know? Second of all, what's speculation? You know, what are we thinking about? And that's us as well as other systems. What opportunities are being discussed here and elsewhere? And then the fourth, and probably most important to today, is how quality can be assured. What can we do from a quality assurance standpoint to be proactive in that? So know. What do we know? As you know, you can read the news. Coursera, Udacity, and edX, certainly the big players. They're not the only ones. There are a lot of other people who are saying, hey, wait a second, we did MOOCs before you called that a MOOC. But certainly those 3 players are in the process of developing courses that are intended to be open and certainly lead to a conversation about scaled access and affordability. We know that probably unlike any other major expansion in the online education world in the recent decade to 15 years, this one is being led by some of the biggest, most well-regarded institutions, not only in the U.S., but in the world. That is a game changer when you have Georgia Techs and Stanfords and Harvards and University of Texas, et cetera, at the table. It's going to get noticed a little faster, and that certainly has happened, and I'm certain that was a part of the strategy. As you've talked about already at this conference, I mean, the ACE doing their evaluations of credit, looking at certifying, evaluating these courses for their course equivalency, that they are an apple to apple, Macintosh to Granny Smith maybe, but apple to apple in terms of what we do. That's just the tip of the iceberg. There's going to be much more intention in terms of especially general education offerings. We know that. A lot of talk of credits. A lot of talk of course sequences, a lot of talk about supplementing existing instruction, acceleration options for students, full degree and certificate options. You saw in the news Georgia Tech went out there, and one of the first, they're going to offer their Master of Science in Computer Science in a MOOC-like environment. That is, again, not at 100,000 scale or 50,000 scale, but they're talking about at peak, that program will have approximately 2,000 students enrolled in it. Again, it's looking at the scale of possibility. A very active conversation is going on, and has been for a year plus, about the development of this content. What has changed here recently is an emerging conversation about the utilization. You can't pull those 2 conversations apart. They're certainly related. But you've got a lot more of the higher education enterprise interested in raising their hand saying, yeah, we'd like to be at the table talking about how this is going to be used. And that certainly is where we found it. Because the reality is the quality assurances that can be embedded in the supports, assessments, and articulation function is going to be key going forward to the comfort of the academy in embracing it. And then the other thing that we know, the last thing that is the conversation is changing on a daily basis, and the actors are as well. We're sitting here at the end of the spring versus the summer of 2013. Who knows by December what will be out there. Because the reality is, when we had this meeting here last year, we were, hey, have you heard about this thing called MOOC? What's a MOOC? What's that? Has that got any traction? Is that going to get up and running? It's amazing how in a year. And there's certainly been a lot of actors coming to the game, and many, many, many more higher education institutions around the country are now directly involved in the development of content than were this time last year. To the speculation topic. A lot of conversation about this emerging conversation on how they're going to be used. What are going to be the rules of the game? I think one of the things that is starting to become clear is it's not just about the content. Content does not a course make. Content does not a learning experience make. That's a piece of it. But what are the academic supports? What are the student development supports? What are the proctored assessments? What's the articulation policy issues that need to surround this conversation? The disruptive influences are certainly being explored. It's being felt, but the verdict's really out regarding what are the long term. I can recall, this would have been 96. President Joe Johnson, the University of Tennessee, he's recently, well, not recently retired, been retired for several years. He was in front of the Senate Ed and House Ed Committee in Tennessee, and they asked a question about, they were hearing about the online course development, the Regents Online Degree Program in Tennessee, and some things the University of Tennessee system were saying. And they said, well, Dr. Joe, do you think this is going to replace? We don't have the need for these buildings, and we can probably, we can save a lot of money probably if we don't have to hire all these faculty and staff. And Dr. Joe said, I think it was Senator Annie Womack, as long as I've been president, and I think as long as I look in the future, there will always be parents that are just sick enough of 18-year-olds that they need some place for them to go. He said that he was pretty sure the core enterprise was safe, but then he followed that with, this has the potential to allow us to reach some audience that we wouldn't have reached without. And that's exactly, where that went. Both in Tennessee, it went in Oklahoma, and it's gone in Georgia. We certainly have, through online strategies and what many of you do, reached audiences that we would not be able to reach. We've allowed individuals to be able to continue their studies with some flexibility. But it certainly has changed the enterprise. And there are very real tensions. There's a lot of speculation about where's this going to center. Is it going to continue to be a conversation that is student-centered or institution-centered? I don't have an answer to that, but I can tell as I talk with my colleagues in other systems that there's a lot of struggle between that. Are we thinking about positioning higher education, thinking about how we can put the best interest of students and opportunities and learning opportunities, or are we going to insist upon that fitting the mold of the way we describe our institutions today? Great deal of tension. I'm not going to lie to you. There's a lot of that in the conversations in Georgia and thinking about how we go forward. Opportunities being discussed. And again, this is both here and nationally, and this is kind of a hodgepodge. I've mentioned the expansion of the open educational resources. I think there's an element of that plus expansion of PLA and acceleration options. I've talked in front of a number of audiences about the fact we celebrate the student that through a variety of options like AP credits and dual enrollment and portfolio assessment and maybe prior learning based on military experiences, all those things, if we can get a student that, hey, you've got 27 hours in the bank, what a great start you have toward a degree. What a great start you have toward having your associate degree completed. What a great start you have toward you may be able to do your bachelor's degree in a 3.5, 4-year window. We hold that up as a good thing. But the reality is, especially as it relates to AP and dual enrollment and CLEP and those sort of opportunities, it's heavily skewed toward folks that happen to grow up in the right communities and go to the right high schools. All right? Not to pick scab, I used to talk about this in Oklahoma a lot. A lot of those things, they're acceleration options for a lot of folks that were coming to higher education anyway. They're not really pushing our access. All right? They're things that are taken advantage of by a lot of students that are already well on their way to having a springboard into success in college. What I'm hearing from my counterparts in other systems is an emerging conversation about what are the implications for having these type of resources and supports out there to expand those sort of opportunities and to expand those perhaps to adults that find themselves needing to re-engage. Second category would be looking at complementary paths to credit sequences and degree completion. Again, the idea, hearing a lot about embedding certificates that can be done, so portions of programs that can be done in a MOOC or MOOC-like environment within a traditional program, almost a hybrid approach. But again, looking for how can you leverage those assets in the name of helping student success, increasing learning, but also looking at affordable options for students in those programs. Most of the discussions are centered around how the scale of content, the scale of supports, and the scale of assessments can result in maybe some more affordable options. There's a lot of, hey, we've got to get in here and we've got to get our hands dirty in it. We've got to experiment and we've got to do the research and assessment to be able to look into how that's going to work. As we've talked to the board about understanding how credits done in a MOOC environment, and again, it's whether USG does anything or not. We were down at the University of Texas. They very clearly, they're going to build out the entire gen ed in a MOOC environment. That $30 million they've invested isn't going toward niche programs. It's going toward how can they leverage gen ed opportunities. I mean, if a student wants to turn, and they're not talking about worrying about in-state, out-of-state at all, if a student wants to turn to that, who's not going to accept University of Texas credits in this room? Nobody. So, I mean, in the end, it's how is that scale? How's that layer cake of options? It's a myth that students come to us and they do hours 0 through 120 in one status. All right? When you start taking apart a graduate's transcript, and I know I'm preaching to the choir, you guys do it all the time. You see the hodgepodge. They come through a variety of different paths. All those different prior learning assessment, the AP, the dual, they went to a community college to get these credits. They went to a regional university to get those credits, and they came back and finished at another regional university. This is perhaps another layering of opportunities for individuals. The quest that I hear counterparts talking about around the country is there in all of this the equation of high quality learning opportunities merged with affordable cost to give high value to students? Okay? And in that, they're dealing with the same things that we are dealing with here in Georgia. The last decade of tuition and fee increases are getting to the point where they have about priced certain segments of their states, certain segments of their market, out of seeing that they've got a place at the table, a seat in the classroom of a USG institution or a University of Texas system institution or a Cal State or a SUNY or a whatever. Great concern about that. And I was telling the group earlier, that's not anybody's fault in here. That's not any one state. That's the dynamic, the world we live in. New dollars available to state government are really restricted in what they can go for. We've got 20 years worth of court cases that surround K-12 equalization, surround corrections, and surround health care that have pretty well set up that just about every new dollar is already spoken before it even makes it in the coffer. All right? We're not alone in that, but figuring out some way to work within that. It is threatening, I know, to hear a lot of folks talking about $150 a course. But as I'm very informally surveying and just kind of keeping my ear to the ground, that's what a lot of folks are talking about, that price point. That's kind of scary because that's a third of what the best that you can do in our system is. That's about an eighth of the best that you can do in private schools in Georgia. And I wouldn't even venture to guess what it is compared to the proprietary sector. I mean, that's significant. And again, it's whether we do anything or not, it's some leading institutions in the U.S. and the world that are talking about that type of price point. Fourth category, though, is how quality can be influenced. And this is the thing where I'm asking you to come to the table and roll up your shirt sleeves and put on your thinking caps. Because we're going to get active. We're going to get proactive. My counterparts in some of these other systems see that we can't sit back. We have to get to the table, and we've got to demand quality. I talked about the development focus is starting to be equal by the conversation around utilization. During the winter and the spring, we have been talking with SUNY, CUNY, University of Texas system, the Cal State system, the Penn State system, the University of Maryland system, the University of Colorado system, University of Tennessee system, Tennessee Board of Regents, and the University of Nebraska system. And there are other partnerships of systems that are active as well about how can we get much more proactive in this conversation surrounding the MOOC content and how it is going to be used. Again, the rules of the game. Those conversations have been about the content and understanding the content, that maybe this stretching of the boundaries of open educational resources. It's been about there's got to be this conversation about academic supports and academic quality and student development supports. We don't just cast students to the wind. That is not a winning argument. It's got to be about proctored assessments to be able to truly say that Houston Davis knows what Houston Davis says he knows. And it's got to be about very intentional conversations about policy and articulation matters. Those proactive conversations have led really from late November to today. to Coursera, Udacity, and edX. I think a little bit of a light bulb going off with them and seeing that, hey, this conversation about utilization is every bit as important as our conversation with a segment of higher education about development. We've started seeing them talk a lot more about use, a lot more about quality assurances, and a lot more about what does the broader higher education enterprise need of content such as this, and how can it be positioned to be able to help and aid in what we're trying to do, as opposed to just run counter. That's important because the reality is, guys, they don't have a sustainability model if they don't have a user model. That's where economics does hit them, okay? So, being at the table and being proactive. Appropriate ways for higher ed to use the content, the technology, the analytics, the services. Talking a lot about opportunities to enhance and improve teaching and learning in selected disciplines. Having a lot of conversations throughout higher ed about how to best leverage the technology, the platform, to have more high quality options. A lot of conversation about this probably is not about 100,000 people, all right? It's not about trying to have quality teaching and learning experiences for 100,000 people. But it's also not about doing it just for 30 or 35 either. It's somewhere in between. I told the group earlier, somewhere in between 100,000 and 30 is the sweet spot. But either way, it's comforting to know that the MOOC developers, the CEOs of Coursera, Udacity, and edX are all now seeing that there is a sweet spot. There is a breaking point where teaching and learning erodes. And discipline by discipline, course level by course level, that may be a different thing. So there's more of a nuanced view of that, I think, now than there might have been just a few months ago. We also have to, and this is where we've got to be proactive, we have to get out there and be able to articulate what goes into learning besides world-class content. I mentioned earlier that content does not a course make. Content does not a learning experience make. But we should be able to deconstruct that. We should be able to rally around being able to talk about what's the value added of all those things that we do. What are the things that, yeah, for years and years and years, the printing press allowed humans to engage with content, all right, in a way that we never had before. And we've just had evolutions from that point up in terms of how it's used. But there's always been the interaction between humans with that content. What's that value added? What goes into leading to deeper understanding of that content? What goes into being able to develop skills within that area? What goes into contextual knowledge that allows further application and amplification of that subject matter? Those are the things that this is a great opportunity for us to shed some light on. And then I think it's also an opportunity for us to really reflect on what's different about this, if anything at all, to other developments in technology. I mean, whether it be mass print opportunities, radio, TV, VCRs being in everybody's house, or the first web-based courses, none of those have replaced what we do, but all of those have certainly influenced what we do, how we do it, who we do it to. So to what extent is this technology and the scale of the technology going to change how we teach and how we learn? And I would say the odds are the MOOCs will probably follow a similar pattern to those other things. But I think we do have to think critically about what are the implications for our various tiers of institutions. I'm very sensitive to the fact that among our 31 schools, there are various levels of angst about all of this. I appreciate that. We are attending to that and absolutely positively keeping an eye on that as we talk with the leadership of your campuses about all of this. Last week's announcement, and this I'll wrap up with this, with Coursera and several other higher education systems, was a system-level partnership, a place to start the conversation, a place for our campuses to be able to engage, to get into that sandbox and see if there's anything in that sandbox that's worthwhile, anything that advances any of your goals. We want our campuses that are interested in working within not only those resources, but other open educational resources and other open models to be able to work within that platform, to be able to use that toolkit expansion. It is non-exclusive. We don't want to put ourselves into a box. I mean, just like we've got lots of tools. We've got existing learning management systems. We've got these MOOC platforms. We've got other open educational resources. We've got thinking about what the next generation of library and learning resources are. All of those tools are going to be a part of what we need to have maximum flexibility to allow you to work in innovative and creative spaces. Many of your campuses are already involved in flexible models of delivery, ranging from independent learning, self-directed, all the way through models that still retain a lot of intensive supports. We know that some of the campuses that are already aggressive in that will probably be some of our campuses that will step forward to identify some options to begin working within the Coursera platform and taking advantage of any of those resources that you see are helpful. The partnership with the other systems is going to allow our faculty and our academic leadership to be at the table and be a very active partner in shaping the rules of the game as far as utilization and the further expansion of the MOOCs. We've talked with Coursera, Udacity, and edX about there needs to be a gap analysis. There needs to be a conversation about what is it that between the direction that they are heading and what the real needs of higher education are. And within that is a nice, healthy conversation about how they may be able to help advance some of our existing goals. I absolutely, positively, some of this is I'm stubborn. I think that if we will come to the table, we can make a huge difference, and my counterparts and these other systems do too, in insisting on preservation of quality from the very beginning. We absolutely, from the start of this, are going to have to do that, or anything that you as campuses or that we as a system do in this space is what's going to be scrutinized first of all. If we insist on anchoring that in quality from the very beginning, that is good. Now, I'll also be the first to say, and I don't want to pick any scabs here, we don't really know that much about the learning outcomes of our traditional platforms. All right? We got to be really careful when we start shouting about this is no good, ours is good, when we don't have a lot of good data to point to. That's something we've got to shore up. We've got to do that anyway. That's something that we've got individual academic programs that because you've got accreditation issues, or we've got some of our campuses that just have very, very rich institutional effectiveness and quality assessment operations that cut across not only academic but non-academic units. We've got random pockets in the state that do very, very well. I'm looking forward to seeing how we can lift up and hold up, because it doesn't matter what the platform, what the delivery strategy is. No one should be able to question what the University System of Georgia is willing to endorse on a transcript. The other thing is, I think we need to hold to this, and John Sizemore may throw something at me, he hears me say this all the time, not what the MOOCs are, but what we need the MOOCs to be. All right? When you hook together a few million students and a few 100,000 faculty in multiple systems, I can promise you this, we'll have an influence on what the MOOCs are going to be. That's the bet that we across systems are making in being able to drive that quality assurance. We know that we expect that we're going to have faculty that are absolutely going to step up and have an active role in shaping the curriculum, adapting existing content, looking at blended learning options, creation of new. We want to give the policy flexibility, but we also want to make certain that from the beginning that we are absolutely going to be honed in on learning outcomes and being able to document that. We expect that we're going to put out a call to participate in really all of our campuses, really for exploration and participation in looking at content, looking at supports, looking at assessments. Some of that may be looking at limited course offerings, some of that in the gen ed environment, some of that looking at associate degree completion options. Some of it may be looking, just as Georgia Tech did. They've looked at and they've determined that at the master's level in computer science, they've identified that as a discipline that's appropriate for a scaled up MOOC-like, not full MOOC, experience. We fully expect that there are going to be conversations about credit sequences, about complementary pathways, about certificates that can be embedded in different degree structures. We know that there's some talk right now about some of our campuses using some of these supports for gateway courses. And certainly major expansion of OER considerations. We intend on announcing in the next couple of weeks a broad-based e-learning advisory council that we're going to ask the individuals that we're approaching about serving on that for an 18-month commitment, because quite honestly, the next 18 months is going to be a wild ride. There's so much going on in the last year. We know that we're in one of those periods of transition and change and disruption. We need that group to be able to fly at 10,000 feet along with us. Many folks in this room are part of these usual suspects, I think. That composition is going to include not only individuals that have served on the Distance Education Task Force. In the last year, they get first right of refusal. I understand if they want to beg off. The Faculty Advisory Council leadership, RACD leadership, academic VPs, student affairs VPs, CIO positions, some of the representatives from our academic discipline groups. We want to have that broad-based, and we want to make certain that every single campus in our system is represented in that conversation as well. We also expect that we're going to be putting out a call for institutions that are interested in coming forward and exploring, are there any consortial opportunities? Are there any opportunities for 5 of our state colleges or 6 of our state universities and state colleges, or a regional university, a state university, and a state college to come together around some complementary pathways? I mean, we certainly want to create opportunities for some innovation and creativity within that space, again, with quality assurances undergirding it. Now, all of that is very much, that's just setting out a path for a conversation. One thing, please know, there's not like there's some plan sitting in a drawer at 270 Washington Street that somebody's already dreamt up. This is, I came to this role, and I know that we're in a period of time where a lot of things are drifting toward open educational resources, and that's something I have a passion about. No offense if there are any publishers in the room, but the Academy produces the content. We need to be committed to open use of that content. We've got a lot of opportunities to leverage our relationships with those that have been important to disseminating and collecting all of that. I feel the same way. I mean, about the Academy taking ownership of this time where we're talking about a broadening of open educational resources and what's going to be the implications on what we do. I want to make certain that we've got a seat at the table. Far better for us to be able to be there and be talking about where's this going, what are the rules, what do we value most. If the conversation is going to happen, by golly, here's what we believe in and we're going to hold to. That's what we need you to be a part of that conversation. It's going to, probably more importantly than the system level, it's going to play out on your campuses. And that's where I hope that you're a number of our leaders, you're a number of our innovators, you're, again, as I said earlier, some of our folks that are right there at the doorsteps of protecting quality in a lot of ways. If you'll hold fast to that and know that we're going to support that, but we definitely want to be willing to get out there and work in the space and make certain that we're thinking about how these assets are leading to meaningful opportunities for Georgians to advance their educational goals. I appreciate what you do. I say all the time that higher education is not at 270 Washington Street. I mean it. It wasn't at 655 Parkway Towers in Tennessee either. I mean, it's on our campuses. It's what you do. But we want to make certain that we're creating conditions whereby you can succeed in that. We want to make certain that we're setting up conditions where we can run interference for you to get access to things that you want to have access to if you've deemed them to be appropriate for your needs. That's where we're going with this conversation, and in some ways it's a matchmaker service. And for those of you that want to be in that conversation, we welcome you and really look forward to this time next year being able to report out on what do we know about what's working. What have we learned through the assessments, not only within Georgia, but across these other states, and have a meaningful conversation about, well, what is this platform going to look like in the future? What's going to be the policy and the procedures that are going to undergird it? So thank you for your time today, and I appreciate your flexibility in allowing me to speak on that topic. And again, I'm not Kristen, but Houston, I'm here. Thank you.